Hello and thanks for joining us at interest.co.nz. I'm Jenée Tibshraeny and today I'm joined by Finance Minister GrantRobertson. Thank you for your time, Minister.
No worries.
Look, you've made a major announcement confirming details of the proposed income insurance scheme. For people listening, there's lots of details on our website, but basically this means that if you lose your job, you will get paid up to 80% of your income up to a certain level. And I guess the way that this will get funded is levies that will be paid by employers and employees. Minister, some people who have been receiving welfare for some time at a lower level than this might be thinking, this isn't fair. Why are high-earning people who lose their jobs going to get paid more if they lose their jobs?
Yeah, and I see them as this is a complementary scheme to our overall welfare scheme. They're achieving two different purposes. The first, through this scheme, is to fill a gap in our welfare system that most countries have. Australia and New Zealand are the only countries in the OECD who don't. And it's about a recognition of the economic scarring effect that occurs for people when they lose their jobs. We have outgoings, we have arrangements that if we're suddenly placed in a position, either because we've been made redundant or because, you get cancer or something and you're have a health condition that prevents you from being able to work, there is a place for a scheme that supports people into a new job. That is not to diminish the importance of having an overall welfare and income support system that gives people the incomes that they need. And obviously the government has been increasing those levels of support to those on lower incomes consistently, and we've got another one coming on the 1st of April. So there are two different parts of the system. And I guess the other thing I'd say to people who are in those circumstances that you raise is that for many of them, they came to be in the income support system upon losing a job. And this is the kind of scheme that will support people in those circumstances.
Okay, other people might be thinking, well, I don't want to pay the levy. So for someone earning $100,000, that's about $1,400 a year. That's an additional tax that they are paying. They might think, actually, I'm willing to take that risk whereby if I lose my job, I have savings, I'll go into the regular welfare system, I will take another job even if I have to take a pay cut. I can manage that risk myself. I have private insurance. Why is this not an optional thing?
Look, obviously we considered a range of possibilities, one of which was an optional scheme versus the all-in scheme that we've got here. I think what we learned in COVID was that when this sort of thing happens, like we had to do with the wage subsidy, that actually there's a collective benefit to New Zealanders to making sure that we actually keep people in work, or if we can't, support them to retrain. The loss of the potential, the loss of value to the economy is enormous. And so, yes, of course, you could do it optional and a lot of people would miss out on it. I actually think we benefit collectively from this, and the important thing for people watching or listening to this is that this is a proposal developed by the government, but with Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions. And all of those three social partners have got an interest in more stability and in more security in the labour market. So yes, some people would say I can do this on my own, but I think the overall collective benefit is such that a levy-based contribution scheme is the right way to do it.
Here's the other thing. If I lose my job and I can go on this for 6 months, and if I'm getting 80% of my income paid, I might think, well, actually, this is pretty good. I'll take a break, I'll have a holiday for a bit, and I'll take my time to get back into employment. And I'll satisfy ACC. I'll say to them I'm job hunting and training and whatever it takes.
Yeah, and that's the reason why you do have to satisfy ACC. So people have responsibilities if they're in this scheme to either be looking for work or to be undertaking training. And so if people abuse the system, there will be mechanisms to deal with that. I think very few people will actually be in those circumstances. I think most people actually would rather that when they get the bad news that they're losing their job, when they sit down to talk to their family about that, if the first conversation isn't, oh my God, how are we going to pay the bills, but rather is, hey, maybe now's the time for me to retrain or go into a new area. That's a much better conversation for all of us to be having. So, of course, in any system, you'll get people who will try to manipulate it. We think we're going to put rules in place to stop that.
Okay, what about the regressive nature of this in the sense that the levies that employers and employees need to pay is the same, 1.39% each, regardless of what their income is? So for someone on the minimum wage, that's $11.20 a week. That's bread and milk.
Yeah, and look, again, and this is why we want people to submit to us on, we've considered whether a differentiated levy would be a good idea. Obviously, as a percentage of people's income, it is, you mentioned $1,000 versus $11, but that is a lot of money for somebody on the minimum wage. But the the counterpoint is the security that it provides them should they lose that job. So we're interested in people's views on the structure of the levy system. We've gone for one that is simple, easy to implement, and provides the benefits to people. One area that is in the document that we are asking people for their feedback on is should people who are on the very lowest incomes be exempted from the levy? Because we know from research on things like KiwiSaver that even a 1% contribution is off-putting to people. So we are asking people, should there be some kind of exemption for those on the lowest incomes? We do want to hear about that, but ultimately this will work best as a contributory scheme that everyone's involved in.
Okay, National has said that it would abolish the scheme if it goes into government. Now I note that you've worked with Business New Zealand on this, which is a good attempt to try to make everyone happy, but should you not have gone to National at the start and said, this is a massive scheme, we need you to get on board?
There's plenty of time for the National Party to get on board if that's what they choose to do. We worked with Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions in part because they actually came to us and said we think this area of displaced workers is something that we need to work on, and we agreed with that. The design of the scheme is now open. There will obviously be a parliamentary process. I would note that the potential coalition partner for the National Party, the ACT Party, in fact has a policy a little bit different from the one that we've proposed. So I don't think the views on this are necessarily defined by where you sit on the political spectrum. This is about economic security and opportunity, and I'd ask the National Party to engage in it. But if they don't want to do that, and they've already made their mind up before they've started, so be it. We're going to push on.
Okay, Minister, a point that the National Party has been making is that, and this is a fair one, in fact, that the cost of living is increasing at the moment much faster than wages. Now, inflation is an issue that the Reserve Bank deals with, but I'm interested in what you can do to help put a lid on this problem. An idea I had was that all the money allocated in the COVID response, it's about $62 billion. I wonder if you'll go back and look at some of that and think, hold on, actually the need wasn't that as bad as we thought it was going to be in this area. Let's cancel that program, or let's cancel that. Just little bits and pieces here and there. Is that something you might do?
We've constantly gone back and looked at the fund, and we have actually reprioritised money. We've managed to reprioritise about $3 billion over the course of the last couple of years, and we do that. We've reached the point now where much of that funding has actually been spent, and the big sums of money, the stuff that would make a real difference, is things like the wage subsidy scheme and the resurgent support payment, and that's gone. But in principle, yeah, I think what you're saying is correct. We have to go back and look at both whether the money was allocated in the right place, has it been spent. We're constantly doing that, and that won't stop.
So for some groups that you've said to them, look, you will get this money, or money's been allocated to a certain project, but a proper cost-benefit analysis wasn't actually done because it was all too fast, might you go back and say, hold up, sorry, you're not getting that anymore? Yeah,
it's more though where the money hasn't been spent rather than that, and we've already done that. We've already, as I said, recycled $3 billion, and you saw details of that in the budget documentation. But as we go forward in those projects and those programs, we always look to see we're still getting the value for money that we asked for.
Okay, looking at those inflation figures, housing makes up a really large portion of that, and that's rents as well as the cost of actually building a house, and that's those building materials. If we talk about rents first, the lowest income people in New Zealand are paying a huge portion, over 55% of their disposable incomes on living costs, which is the highest in the OECD. What is a way of fixing that without bringing house prices down? Yeah,
so there's no single way, and I know that's an unsatisfactory answer, but it is true that there are a huge number of dynamics at play for somebody on a low income, indeed on any income, in terms of the cost of living. So the first thing we can do is support those people's incomes, lift them, and we are doing that. In terms of the prices that they're paying for things, in particular housing, most forecasters are now talking about a drop in house prices, albeit a relatively small one in some cases. As I've often said to you and to others, what we do is we set the rules, we set the criteria. I don't set a specific percentage. I want housing to be more affordable, and it is becoming more affordable, but obviously not at the pace that people are looking for. Beyond that, there are other parts of cost of living, and particularly we do have social supports in place through things like the accommodation supplement and the accommodation benefit for people when it gets up to that percentage of their income that they're paying for housing.
Yeah, but look, I mean, this is the tough thing, is that if you boost wages more than what they're being boosted at the moment, that contributes towards inflation, which is the problem that we're trying to get on top of. And if we pay more transfer payments to people who need it because they're in absolute dire straits, I mean, it's just awful to look at, then that actually potentially exacerbates this inflation problem.
It's a balance, obviously. That's the point, is you can't walk away from a situation where people need income support in the dire kind of situations that you're in. So you have to get the balance right. On the other side, making sure that what is in our system to manage inflation, which is in the hands of the Reserve Bank, they have the mandate and they are serious about returning to the 1 to 3% band. I'd also note that while these inflationary pressures and cost of living pressures are higher than we have seen them for some time now, we have to remember that also everybody is forecasting for them to dissipate over the next 12 to 18 months. And while the annual inflation number, yes, went up and may well go up in the next quarter, the quarterly number came down. And so if we see that continuing trend, then a lot of these inflationary pressures will wash out towards the end of the year. Doesn't take away from how hard it is now for people, but in terms of the policy settings, we have to bear that in mind. But it is the Reserve Bank's job to manage price stability. It's our job to make sure fiscal policy is balanced so that we're supporting people but also not exacerbating the situation. I don't believe if you go through the government spending that you will see the things that are being claimed that are so-called driving inflation. Where they are, things like building supplies, it is an external thing. It is a supply chain thing. Now, the government could theoretically say, we're going to stop building state houses. That would make the problem that we're trying to solve around housing even worse. So we've got to get a balanced solution here that deals with what are the supply issues as well as housing demand.
Sure, and it is, and just coming back to the spending, it is worth noting that the wage subsidy, I just want to confirm, was a huge part of that expenditure, which is something that everyone was very much on board with at the time. Now, the Reserve Bank, just finally, the Wellington economics community is upset because people are leaving the Reserve Bank. Senior people, 10 out of 26, either resigned or said that they were going to resign in the last 6 months of last year. The criticism is that the bank is losing institutional knowledge, sort of economics experts. Are you concerned about this, and are you in touch regularly with the board?
I certainly am in touch regularly with the chair of the board, as I am, I would say, of all the boards that I'm responsible for. And obviously I also meet and talk with the governor in the policy areas that he's responsible for. There has been, a significant turnover of staff at the Reserve Bank. There's also been a whole structural change within the bank, and from time to time this happens in organisations. I've got confidence in the chair of the board, and I do have confidence in the Reserve Bank governor. The governor and the board have helped lead New Zealand through the financial crisis that we've had with COVID-19. That has been a massive thing, and like all of us, we can take time to reflect on whether we got every decision right, but my view is New Zealanders should have confidence in that. When it comes to individual staffing decisions, those are matters for the board and the governor, and if I was reaching into that, I would be being criticised by many of the same people. So my perspective remains that I have confidence in them, that the staff I know that are being hired are ones that are of quality, and equally some of those who are leaving are of high quality as well. That happens from time to time in an organisation. I still think the Reserve Bank is doing the job New Zealanders need it to do.
Okay. Finance Minister GrantRobertson, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jenée.